The boardroom table was long and polished, reflecting the cold light of the morning. I was sitting there, ready to give the final presentation for Project Nightingale, the work that was supposed to secure my future, both professionally and personally. Victoria, my fiancée of 3 years, walked in 3 minutes late. She looked different, colder. She wore a new, expensive dress and avoided my eyes. Her father, Mr. Covington, the CEO of Iridian Systems, and her smirking cousin Felix sat beside her. Victoria didn't say hello. She just looked at me, her expression dead and final. She pushed a plain white folder across the table toward me. "I'm calling off the wedding, Julian, and I'm replacing you on Project Nightingale with Felix. You've simply become a liability." The words hit me like a physical blow. The sudden, deep shock made my ears ring. This was not a breakup. This was a professional execution 3 weeks before our wedding. I looked at her, then at her father, who was watching with silent approval. What the hell just happened to him? My name is Julian Vance. I was 30 years old, and for 5 years, I was a quiet, smart engine of Iridian Systems, working tirelessly, all because I love Victoria and believe in the future her family promised. That single sentence from Victoria was the most expensive mistake she ever made. I stared at the folder, then back at Victoria. My hands were shaking, but I forced my voice to stay level. A liability? Victoria, I created 80% of the core code for Project Nightingale. I was cleared for this wedding just 3 weeks ago. Her father leaned forward, his face stern. "It's a family decision, Julian. The project is too big to rely on emotional variables." He was calling my deep emotional shock a variable. I understood instantly. The Florida trip wasn't a bachelorette party. It was a 3-day brainwashing session designed to convince her to secure my work and dump me. The real shock wasn't a broken engagement. It was a betrayal of my entire professional career. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly on the floor. I didn't grab the folder. "Fine," I said, meeting Victoria's cold eyes. "You want to replace me? Do it. But understand this. You just lost the most dedicated mind in this company." Felix snickered. "Cry me a river, Julian. Get your stuff and report to the basement storage team." Mr. Covington added, "Your severance is generous, Julian. Take it and leave quietly." I gave him a calm, cool look that belied the volcano of anger inside. I knew I couldn't fight them in this room. But I also knew the one thing they didn't know. I had already secured the core technology they were about to steal. 3 months ago, driven by a nagging suspicion about their constant favoritism toward Felix, I made a critical, quiet move. I had filed the complex foundational code, the heart of Project Nightingale, as preliminary intellectual property, IP, under a separate, untraceable holding company. I called it the North Star Trust. I had always kept the final, critical piece of code locked away on a secure, private server. Victoria and Felix had the framework, but they didn't have the engine. I was the only person who had the final encryption key. Their entire billion-dollar project was now legally owned by me, and they were preparing to launch a system that would immediately fail. I went down to the basement storage office, my new desk, and started my plan. The first step was research. I had to know every single financial vulnerability of Iridian Systems. I used the company intranet, which they stupidly forgot to cut off completely, to quietly gather data. I found proof that Mr. Covington had leveraged nearly 70% of the company's assets on the success of Project Nightingale. If it failed, Iridian Systems would collapse completely. Their arrogance was my greatest tool. They thought I was a defeated ex-fiancé, weeping in the storage room. My second step was subtle sabotage. Since I still had remote access to the beta version of Project Nightingale that Victoria was now trying to test, I began to plant small, highly specific lines of corrupt code. These lines wouldn't cause an immediate crash. They would only cause the system to break down under heavy operational load, exactly the moment of its public launch. I needed Felix to look like an incompetent idiot, and Victoria to look like a terrible manager. I wanted their failure to be undeniable and public. Felix, the arrogant cousin, strutted down to the basement a week later. He wore my old office jacket and reeked of cheap cologne. "Hey, storage boy, I need the specs for the older firewall protocol." Victoria says you should hand them over. He was trying to push me around. I looked at him calmly. Sure, Felix. I'll email them to you. But be careful. The older protocols have a known tiny buffer overflow issue. It only appears if you run a high-frequency, simultaneous data query. You might want to update the patch I created 3 months ago. I gave him a key piece of information and subtly warned him about the exact weakness I had just enhanced. He just sneered. Don't tell me how to code, basement boy. Victoria finally called me, not to apologize, but to demand access to my old personal laptop. Julian, you need to bring in your laptop. There are files we can't access. She sounded frustrated. I knew why. They were hitting the paywall for my real, patented code. I kept my voice flat. That laptop is personal property, Victoria. I wiped it clean before I left my office. It's useless. All company IP is on the central server, and you know the path. I was gaslighting the gaslighters. I knew the critical files were nowhere near that server, and they were wasting precious time searching. My lawyer, Mr. King, whom I had hired quietly months ago, met me in a neutral coffee shop. I gave him a complete portfolio of the IP documents for the Noir Trust and the specific patent numbers. Mr. King, I want you to prepare a comprehensive lawsuit and a federal injunction. The ground or unauthorized use of proprietary technology. We wait until the moment Project Nightingale is officially announced to the press and the shareholders. I want the injunction served live. Mr. King nodded, impressed by my comm strategy. You are planning a total professional knockout, Julian. Victoria and Felix were starting to make major, visible mistakes in the office. They were missing deadlines, and the testing reports were full of minor, confusing errors, all caused by my subtle sabotage. The office environment was tense. People started whispering that the real talent had been sent to the basement. I used this time to cultivate allies. I spoke with Marcus, the veteran head of QA, who was sick of Victoria's favoritism. I didn't gossip. I just showed him the data inconsistencies in Project Nightingale, making him professionally worried. I met Marcus for lunch and simply showed him the raw, unstable performance data of the beta system, data Victoria and Felix were ignoring. Marcus was furious. This system is not stable, Julian. If they launch this, they will ruin the company. They won't listen to me. They only listen to Covington. I calmly looked at him. Marcus, you're right. So don't tell them. Tell the lead investor's independent audit team. You know they fly in next week. I gave him the professional, anonymous route to exposing internal corruption, making him my perfect, unwitting internal ally. The audit team arrived. They were cold, powerful professionals. They met with Marcus, who bravely presented the unstable performance data. Mr. Covington and Victoria were blindsided. They tried to smooth it over, claiming minor bugs. But the investors' fear was planted. The Viridian system stock dropped 5% in a single day. The company's financial stability was visibly cracking. They looked at me, still sitting in the basement, as the source of their problems, never realizing I was a solution they had kicked out. Mr. Covington, looking strained, came down to the basement to see me. He tried to offer me a consulting contract, a pitiful attempt to buy my silence. Julian, let's stop this nonsense. I'll triple your severance if you sign this NDA and stop talking to people. I stood up, taller than him. I'm not talking to people, sir. I'm providing factual data, and I don't need your severance. I own my own company now. I didn't say the name, but the shock on his face was satisfying. He didn't know how to deal with me when I wasn't financially dependent on him. I scheduled my final, devastating move for the Viridian annual launch gala. The night Project Nightingale was set to be revealed to the entire industry, the press, and all shareholders. This was the moment of their highest confidence, and therefore, their greatest vulnerability. I purchased 2 tickets through a shell corporation, one for me and one for Mr. King. We would be spectators until the precise moment of maximum impact. The day before the launch, I drove to my lawyer's office. I had one final, subtle insurance policy. I had the final encryption key for the real Project Nightingale, which was owned by the Noir Trust. I handed Mr. King a sealed USB drive. If anything goes wrong, This is a master key. It proves total ownership. Then, I sent one final, anonymous email to Felix, urging him to download the critical patch I created months ago, saying it was vital for the launch stability. Felix, desperate to look good, immediately installed a corrupted patch, ensuring a high-load breakdown would be catastrophic. The night of the gala, the room was dripping with crystal and champagne. Victoria was wearing a massive engagement-style diamond necklace her father had bought her, clearly trying to project success. She saw me walk in, impeccably dressed, and her smile vanished. She came straight toward me, her eyes flashing with renewed hatred. "What are you doing here, Julian? You are not welcome." Security. I ignored her threat. I looked past her and directly at her father, who was watching from the stage. "I'm here for the launch, Victoria. I wouldn't miss it." She hissed. "You'll be escorted out." I simply replied, "You need to worry less about me and more about Felix's code. I hear it's running a little hot tonight." I walked past her, leaving her stunned and scrambling to find Felix. The presentation began. Felix, sweating under the spotlight, stood on stage next to a massive screen. He started the demonstration of Project Nightingale. It was impressive for the first 3 minutes. Victoria was beaming. This was the exact moment I had planned for the final, biggest twist. I pulled out my phone. I sent a single anonymous high-frequency data query to the public-facing test server, the trigger for the corrupted code I had planted. The system immediately seized up. The massive screen flashed red, displaying a series of complicated error messages. The room went silent. Felix, panicking, desperately typed commands. He couldn't fix it. The corrupted patch was now irreversible. Mr. Covington rushed the stage, yelling into his microphone, "It's a power surge. It's a glitch." But the damage was done. The investors started whispering, their fear turning to rage. Just as the chaos peaked, Mr. King, my lawyer, calmly walked onto the stage. He tapped Mr. Covington on the shoulder. He handed the CEO a massive federal injunction folder. "Mr. Covington." Mr. King's voice boomed to the microphone. "I represent the North Star Trust. We are serving an immediate federal injunction against Viridian Systems for the unauthorized and illegal use of proprietary technology, patent hashtag VX447. This system is now legally seized." Mr. Covington looked at the document, then at the frozen screen, then at Victoria. The blood drained from his face. "No, this is impossible. We own this." I stepped onto the stage, standing right next to Mr. King, facing the entire horrified crowd. I looked at Victoria, whose face was pure, unadulterated shock. "You don't own it, Mr. Covington." "I own it. Project Nightingale's core IP, the engine you just saw fail, is legally held by the North Star Trust, and I am the North Star Trust's sole owner." I delivered the final, crushing truth. The Florida trip wasn't for a bachelorette party. It was to secure my code and betray me 3 weeks before our wedding. I anticipated your greed. You stole the framework, but you tried to launch a car without an engine. I gave you the chance to fix your mistake, but you chose arrogance. Now you lose everything. Victoria let out a strangled cry of pure defeat. Felix just stood frozen, a deer in the headlights of his own failure. The aftermath was catastrophic. The federal injunction halted all Viridian operations. The major investors immediately filed massive lawsuits for fraud and stock manipulation. Mr. Covington's company, Viridian Systems, was over. He was facing professional ruin and bankruptcy. Victoria and Felix were immediately blamed, their reputations destroyed by their incompetence and theft. They lost their titles, their money, and their professional standing. Their arrogance had created the weapon that killed them. Victoria called me one last time, hysterical, begging, "Julian, please. You can save us. We were wrong. We'll get married. Just give us the key." She was still offering me marriage in exchange for my fortune. I didn't yell. I was simply finished. I answered the phone and spoke one cold sentence. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours regarding the patent rights. This conversation is over." I hung up and immediately blocked her number, closing the door on the toxic chapter forever. Weeks later, I closed the biggest deal of my life. I sold the IP for Project Nightingale to Viridian's largest competitor for a massive, guaranteed buyout price. I walked away a millionaire, legally vindicated and ethically clean. I finally deleted the wedding calendar event on my phone. I didn't look back at the wreckage of the Covington family. They were left with nothing but the failure of their own greed. I was free, financially secure, and ready to launch my own ethical company. The best revenge is becoming the successful future they tried to steal. If you made it this far, you understand. Respect is non-negotiable. My worth wasn't defined by their wedding date or by a job title they could take away. My story proves that silence can be a powerful weapon and that patience is the greatest power in the boardroom. I used their greed to build a fortune on the technology they tried to steal. If this resonated with you, if you've been betrayed by people you trusted, share this story. Tell yourself, your dedication doesn't make you weak. Your smart planning makes you strong. Your survival and your massive, ethical win make you extraordinary. Subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and turning humiliation into triumph. Your worth was never the question. It was just waiting to be remembered. Share your own story below.